Today, we'll be discussing managing the buyer relationship for successful retail display programs, negotiation do's and don'ts for maximizing profits. My name is David Schmidt. I'm the president and CEO of TPH Global Solutions. We are a packaging and display company that specializes in pre-packed displays, supporting brands that produce their goods throughout the globe, through Asia Pacific and North America, and helping them get their products to market. In the course of this webinar, we hope that you'll come away with a series of key takeaways. Among them is how to establish trusting and collaborative relationships with the buyers, how to negotiate costly buyer requests. We'll provide you with a focus on activities and actions that drive consumer interest and sell-through. And as the opportunity presents, we'll have a Q&A at the end. A little bit more on TPH. We've been around since 1965. We help medium and large brands execute programs and selling their products through Costco, Walmart, Sam's, BJ's, Home Depot, and pharma and grocery. Our mission is to make it easy for you to get your products to market. And we work with clients like McDonald's, Disney, Heaven Hill Distilleries, McGraw-Hill Education, Jimmy John's, and more. In this presentation, we're going to share with you 10 different requests that you could come across from a buyer, and that you can and should negotiate them so that you don't unnecessarily become burdened by their requests. In scenario one, a buyer is going to tell you they want a certain style of display before you've determined where in the store you're going to be. Why do we want to push back on this? Because they may dictate a display that costs a lot more than you need, or they may dictate a display that doesn't maximize your opportunity for sell-through on the floor. And why would they do this? Because sometimes they don't realize the impact, and they're just more infatuated with a specific type of display as opposed to something that might be more prudent for your brand, your product, or the location of the store. So how do we go about pushing back on a request like that? Of course, the first thing we want to do is we want to get clarity and ask the buyer, could you give us some insight into where you think we're going to be in the store? Now, maybe the buyer's a category buyer, so you know you're going to be in a certain category. But you want to know specifically, are you going to be, are we talking about an end cap, an end aisle, in the rack, at the entrance? And if it's a club store, is it on the fence? Is it an island? Do you need four-sided, one-sided? Is your product going to be pegged or shelved? So having an idea of where the product is going to be will also help you inform you how you're going to design the display. So we'll want to ask them up front, and so that you can make preparations to come back to them with the options that would best suit you, but also meet the needs of what they're trying to achieve. Another request that has happened is some buyers, maybe they came from the category department, the candy department, but now they're in a different department, but they're used to doing candy style displays that have four-sided openings in the trays. But for your product, a four-sided tray is problematic. Why is that? Because in candy, you could just throw the product back in. It doesn't matter. You've got one product on the display, and it doesn't affect how customers buy the product. But in a consumer product like apparel or footwear, slippers or electronics or something that you might have variability in what's on the display, having them be able to reach in from the side and pull the product out, and then if they don't want the product, put it back in, is problematic because they don't care how they put the product back on the display. And quickly the display will become disheveled, it'll become harder to shop, and it'll have a negative impact on your sell-through. So why do we want to push back? We want to make sure that the request and your ability to sell through are aligned, and they want you to be successful, but we also need to understand what it is they're trying to achieve by making that request. So what we'll do is we'll show them how we can achieve what they're looking for, but maybe with a different style. So instead of doing four-sided trays that are open, we'll do a pinwheel display where you'll have product facing on all sides. Again, it really depends on where in the store you're going to put your product. So we want to be careful about that. We also want to make sure the buyer understands that our goal is to maximize sell-through in dollars per square foot, which aligns with their goals. So as we use that language, we explain to them what our concerns would be for that particular style of a display. And what we will do is we'll demonstrate how a shopper will interact with the display and how we'll have a better outcome if we use a different style in that particular circumstance. The next scenario, a buyer makes a request that actually adds complexity, time, and cost. An example of this would be you're well into the order phase, you're ready to go into pre-production, you're ready to go into production, and they say, we want to see a printed sample before you've started mass production. And they want to see a printed sample with the opportunity that maybe they might make changes, so that stops you from mass production. So what we would advocate is, first off, you want to ask them what their goal is for this request. What is their concern? What is it that they need from seeing a printed sample as opposed to a white sample and a printed proof? What do they want to confirm? Understand where that request is coming from. Once you do that, you can present them with alternatives and how to achieve the same thing without having to incur additional sample costs, because doing a sample run for a printed sample is expensive. It could push your production back a week or two. And if they decide they want to make changes, you'd rather have that to them straight away and make the changes than have to go through mass production and then have something that they don't like. So we want to, again, make sure that we understand why they're asking for what they're asking. We want to be able to present them with alternatives that better suit our needs, but are in alignment with their goals and their reasons. Scenario number 4, a buyer tells you that they want an assortment style, but they haven't given consideration on how that's going to be shopped in the store. So if you look at the image on the screen, you'll see this is an end cap at a Walmart. This is essentially a multi-SKU display of on the end cap, but it's using a generic style tray, and it doesn't do anything to enhance the shopper experience. You know, a consumer who walks through the store, if they are looking for your product, they will find it and they will take the time to find it. But the majority of consumers, especially in seasonal items, are going to be looking at a display, and they're gonna walk by it, and it's gonna pique their interest. And so if we've piqued their interest by walking by it, we want to make it easy for them to find the product that they're interested in, not make it harder. So when a buyer asks you to do something and you know that it's not in the best interest of your brand and your shopper who's going to, try to find its product, then you need to push back. And so one of the ways we do this is we want to make sure that we're all clear on what our mutual goals are. We want to make sure that if the buyer is asking us for multiple sizes and multiple colors and multiple genders on the same display, then we need to help the consumer find that product and be more specific and be more targeted and help them organize the product. That might require that when we present our alternatives, that we also show them how difficult it is based on what they're asking. It may, in fact, impact what the planogram is and what the actual product mix is, because the buyer may want to buy a certain percentage of color and size and gender, but when you lay it out to make it easy for the consumer to buy, that may impact their sort of standard framework. So you've got to negotiate that as part of your final order and get them to buy into it as a precursor to saying, hey, this is the best mix and the best organizational style that's going to help us maximize our sell-through and meet our KPIs, our key performance indicators. It is very common, surprisingly, when a buyer asks you for a display that's non-conforming within their store guidelines. And they may be focused on one element of the guidelines. So we'll use Costco for this example. And in Costco, you can have a display that's a max height of 65 inches in the store. And that's great. But when you have a 65-inch display, that means that you are unable to double stack in your logistics plan, and it dramatically increases your costs if you're building a 65-inch display to flow through the Costco system. So how do we push back on something like that? First off, we want to make sure before we even sit with the buyer, we're aware of what the guidelines are and what our plans are for our logistics plans. So we can red flag that in the conversation and start the pushback around alternatives. And so here's an example of demonstrating logistically what impact a 65-inch display would have on your logistics plan versus a standard 52-inch display and coming either in a truck or coming from abroad. So what happens is that 65-inch display can only be single stacked in the truck. And if you're shipping 1,000 units and you can only get 30 units in the truck because it's single stacked, then your 1,000 units, you need about 35 trucks. Not so great, okay? But if you're double stacking and you're able to send in 60 units in a truck, well, you need half as many trucks. And if your truck is $2,000 a truck, you just saved yourself $60,000. So let's be clear about what we need to be efficient and cost effective and meet the store's guidelines, conformance requirements, and also to help the buyer understand why what they're asking isn't feasible, but it can be done in the store, and most of the store personnel will take back stock and add on to the display in the store. Sometimes a buyer is going to ask you for something that is more costly than you had intended as part of your pro forma. They may want you to add special graphic embellishments or packaging requirements or upgraded materials. You may feel uncomfortable about all of this because you're constrained by a low profit margin. Or your printer may not be able to provide you with those embellishments or those add-ons in the time frame and in the cost structure that you have available. So what you have to do, as always, is you want to ask the buyer what their goals are, but sometimes you can even bring back some of the more global goals of the retailer and let them know that what they're asking for, using the example that I'm providing, doesn't align with their sustainability goals And maybe we could identify or do things graphically that would improve the impact that they're looking for, but not negatively impact the cost or be out of alignment with the store's sustainability goals. And just as an aside, what you'll find in these situations, every single one of them, there's a core framework for what you want to do when you're meeting with a buyer. You want to understand their goals. You want to understand what their reasoning is, and engage the how important it is to them before you start negating what they're asking or offering alternatives. So this way, whatever you come back with, if you come back with alternatives that are better suited and aligned with your costs and timelines, production timelines, that you're also doing it with an eye towards understanding what the buyer is trying to get out of it by asking for that type of request. And I would also advise you that when you're in a situation where you're in front of the buyer, to allow yourself the grace and freedom to say, I understand what you're asking for. Can I go back and ask my team and review what you're looking for and see if we can't come up with a solution that best suits what you're looking for, but also aligns with what we need? And I will tell you that 99.9% of the time, the buyer will always say yes. Scenario number 7, a buyer dictates how much product they want you to put on a display. And it may seem strange that they ask you for less product, or they may ask you for more product than you had anticipated. And why do you want to get around this? Or why would this be important to you? And part of it depends on where you are in your relationship with the retailer. If this is your first order and they come to you and say, we want less product on the display, you may want to jump at that as an opportunity to improve your performance with KPIs, your key performance indicators, so that your selling percentages are higher in the time that they allow on the floor, and you get more opportunity for marketing space. So while it may be more costly for you, it may be to your benefit to agree to a request for less product. Or it may be at the end of a life cycle of a product. Maybe you're in year 4 or 5 and you've been in the store, you've had excellent numbers, but last year your numbers started to tail off a bit. And the buyer is recognizing that the life cycle of your product in the store is tapering off. Maybe consumer interest is moving to a different trend, or you've sold millions of units and you've saturated your market. And so the buyer is recognizing us, and that might be a reason to accept that. But if you want to get more product, or if you want to get less product, you need to sort of find reasons or ways to use that request to get something else in return. And so, again, give yourself the opportunity to process what they're asking for. Go back to the team, understand where they're coming from, formulate your response that's going to be in your best interest. But examples of more product or less product on a display would be where you can use a skirt around the bottom for brand identity, shopper marketing information. And so you can reduce the amount of product on the display. At the same time, you can maybe achieve some logistics efficiencies. So instead of being able to put 2 displays in a double stacked rather in a container or a truck, you can put triple stack and you'll use a third less. So there's some offsets to cost to the program. On the more side, you maximize your your product on the pallet, the amount of fixed costs going into the pallet is amortized over more product, that would be appealing to you, but maybe your production capacity isn't able to keep up with that regular flow, and maybe you want to push back for less product, or maybe you don't want to risk having too many dollars on a pallet before you have a sense of what the sell-through opportunity is going to be at a given retailer. So it's really going to depend on where you are in the life cycle of your product. Scenario number 8. Your buyer says that they want less time, that they want your product on the floor for less time. And that might be startling to you because you need time, depending on where and when they're putting you on the floor, to get the velocity of sell-through that you need to hit the economic targets, your profit targets, and that. And if they're giving you less time than you've had before, or less time than you negotiated, but they kept the order quantity the same, then you have to ask, what's driving this? Why are you being short-circuited, so to speak? And they may come back and say, well, they've got other products that they've got more history with, or they are under a corporate mandate, perhaps, that they have to get more variety on the floor, so they're going to be cycling more product in and out. Or maybe, again, that your product is coming to the end of its life cycle, and they just don't, and they want to get you in and get you out. So how do we push back on that? Again, the framework is always starts with the same. We want to understand what the buyer's goals and reasons are for reducing the time on the floor. Let's be clear about and ask the questions that may be uncomfortable, but how did we do prior years? Or is there something that we need to be looking at to make sure that the amount of product ordered aligns with the time on the floor? Maybe we're going to need to offer an incentive if we have less time on the floor. Maybe we have to do a promotion or a coupon, and would they allow us more time if we invested more money into the product on the floor, having more time on the floor? They may come back and say, well, we like the idea, do the coupon anyways, we still want you less time on the floor. And then you've got to figure out a way to come back to them with, well, what would you need if you're going to spend more money? What can they give you that would make it worthwhile to invest more in the cost structure of this particular order? Maybe you say, okay, so can we have a guaranteed shot at being on the floor with a new product next year, with next generation product? What are we going to negotiate for the give that they're asking for? So we have to figure out what we want during that process. Buyer comes to you and says, we need you to move your delivery date up 2 weeks. And you were planning on delivering right in the flow for a seasonal period or a promotional period, and they want you in 2 weeks earlier. Why would a buyer want you to come in earlier? More than likely, they had a product that informed them that another vendor who informed them that they couldn't make their delivery window. And they've got an opening in their planogram in the store, and they need product. So they're looking for any of the products that they have that were coming in right behind it to see if anybody can come in early. Now, using that example, we may decide that it's not in our best interest. We would have to incur tremendous cost. We would have to, it might impact our logistics expenses. And we're not clear that we could even get the product through the door in the time frame without a tremendous expediting exercise. And so it's okay to push back and say, no, I don't think we can't make that delivery, but we're on schedule for the order delivery as intended. An alternative way to look at that, though, would be the buyer is asking you for a favor. And so if you can help the buyer out of a jam, the buyer may be willing to do you a favor somewhere else in your relationship. So you have to put that into the calculation when you're making that analysis before you push back really hard. And the last scenario we'll present today is that a buyer has come to you and said for a brick and mortar store, but they want to put you in their website first to see how your product does on their website. But you really want to be on the store floor. And so one of the concerns you may have is that unlike being on the store floor, a department store, club store, Walmart, people don't browse on those websites for product. They go to those websites for something specific to see if it's easier for them to procure it. So it's not a demand driver to start e-commerce at a brick and mortar store to see if there's a demand activity and for them to compel to buy your product. So what we would advocate for is that one, you try to understand why they want to put you on e-commerce first, but see if you can do both. Say, hey, we'll do e-commerce, but could you at least let us do a test on the floor so we can demonstrate that the product will perform on the floor or do better on the floor and be backfilled or supported by the e-commerce. And if you can make the case for them, then what we would advocate you do is you design the packaging and display so that it's ready to go on the store floor, but works within their e-commerce system so that they can have it both ways. Your goal is to get on the floor. They want just to let you go on e-commerce. Maybe you can bridge that. Maybe you can get on the floor eventually. And maybe they have an opening in the planogram and you've got product that's ready to roll that they can just pull into the store and you've just gotten into the store and you set it up in a way where you're the hero because they're able to fill a hole with your product. And then your product gets the benefit of being on the floor. So we have a couple cases that have come up from time to time. We most recently have a program where we're producing for a brand in China, and it's a Walmart program, and Walmart is picking the product up in China. So the way this works is Walmart's freight forwarder contacts our factory and tells us when to be ready to load containers, and we build to that load schedule. But in this case, the Walmart designated freight forwarder added a requirement. They said they wanted everything to be on pallets, not to be forloaded. And that's a big ask. First off, pallets in China are 50% more expensive, and you add that expense to every pallet coming out of China only to make it easier on the freight forwarder. We, in this case, had designed the pallets to be forloaded and so that they could be removed from the containers using specific equipment that every freight forwarder, including this Walmart freight forwarder, should have. So that was an overly burdensome ask. We pushed back very hard. Our client pushed back very hard. And ultimately, that request went away, and we didn't have to incur that cost. So just because they ask doesn't mean they get, if it, especially when it creates the kind of burden on you in this case. Another example, one we recently came across, is a buyer told us, or told our client, that they couldn't send their product in from overseas in a pre-packed display, and that they would have to assemble and, in this case, inflate the product at the DC to before loading and having the displays routed to the stores. This was a very unusual request. It's one that we're still struggling to get our arms around. In the end, the buyer gave us permission to send in teams into the DCs and to assemble the displays. And so what we came up with was a partial assembled display for deflated product with mobile inflators, and so we could get more product on the containers to partially offset the cost of the labor at the DCs. But also we got a concession by the buyer to have a longer time on the floor, which gave our brand client, they were happy with the concessions, and so far they're thrilled with the outcome. So our final tips for this presentation are: one, we always suggest you ask what the success metrics are, the KPIs as they're referred to. We want you always to align and understand what the buyer's goals are, so that anything you present as an alternative solution, you're doing so with their goals in mind, but they better align with your costs and timeframes for production. We advocate you come prepared with data and visuals. And we also ask that all of our clients spend some time in the store and observe shoppers and how they engage products in the categories that they're selling through, so they better understand how to position their product graphically, packaging, value messaging, price point, to make the biggest impact, get the best sell through, and really be informed when you're negotiating with a buyer. Because if a buyer asks you for something that you've observed shoppers don't like, you have firsthand knowledge on how to push back on something like that. Steps that we absolutely advocate you don't do is argue, complain, or ignore with a buyer when they ask you for something. Assume you can simply ask for a waiver. Come unprepared, or only try to talk through the issue, and skip the visuals and the data. You want to be able to slam dunk your argument through, and the best way to do it is through preparation, data, and a visual presentation. And if you do it, if you come back and what you're offering is aligned with what the buyer is looking for, you have a very high probability of success of avoiding that unnecessary cost and time suck, as we like to say. That's the sum total of our content today. If there are any questions, we are happy to take some, or as many as you have. Then afterwards, I'll let you know that we have another webinar series coming up in the first quarter of next year.